The jeep rolled to a stop, its tires crunching on the frozen road. The military policeman raised his gloved hand, his breath pluming in the frigid morning air. Inside the vehicle, 3 soldiers sat, their postures relaxed, their American uniforms looking authentic enough, their weapons seeming regulation. They looked the part. Sergeant William Creel approached the driver's side, his M1 carbine held at a ready angle. He had been briefed on the impossible, on a threat that contradicted every notion of warfare and honor he held. The intelligence was fragmentary, whispered, unbelievable German soldiers, operating behind American lines, dressed as GIs, speaking their language. A ghost in the machine of his own army. "Morning, boys," Creel said, his eyes scanning the faces, the vehicle, the details. Everything looked right, almost. The driver, a young man with a faint accent that could have been from anywhere, Boston, maybe, or learned from a bad teacher, nodded. "Morning, Sergeant." "Hell of a day." "It's always a hell of a day here." "What's the password?" The driver's eyes, just for a fraction of a second, flickered towards his companions. "We're with the 5th Division, just trying to get back to our unit. Got separated in the pushback. I didn't ask for your unit. I asked for the password." Creel's voice was flat, hard. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. The man in the passenger seat leaned forward. "Look, Sergeant, we've had a rough time of it. The comms have been down. We must have missed the update." His English was good, but the cadence was off. The rhythm just a little too precise. Like a metronome. Creel's gaze drifted from their faces to the weapons resting between them. His heart hammered once, a dull thud against his ribs. He saw the sleek, distinctive shape of the Sten guns. British, made, compact, efficient. No American patrol would be carrying them. It was a small thing. A tiny crack in the facade, but it was enough. His finger tightened on the trigger of his carbine. Last time. The password. Now. The hesitation was their confession. Their English, strained and faltering, broke down into mumbled German. Within minutes, they were out of the jeep. Hands on their heads, surrounded by MPs with leveled weapons. The search was swift, professional. Under their olive, drab American uniforms, they wore the field, grey wool of the German Wehrmacht. Their identification papers were forgeries, good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. Their names were Unterscharfer Manfred Pernus, Oberfahrenrich G. Billing, and Gefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt. They had just become the most infamous prisoners of the Battle of the Bulge. And none of them, from the captured to the captor, knew that this single, routine checkpoint stop would trigger the most widespread paranoia in American military history. A systematic campaign of cultural interrogation that would turn every crossroads into a quiz show, every conversation into a test of identity, and every soldier into a potential spy. The mathematics of detection were being written not in codes and ciphers, but in baseball statistics, state capitals, and Hollywood gossip. The exposure had begun weeks earlier and hundreds of miles away, in the grim Wolf's lair of Adolf Hitler's headquarters in Rastenburg, East Prussia. On October 22, 1944, the Führer summoned SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny to his presence. Skorzeny, a mountain of a man with a dueling scar etched down his cheek, already stood among Germany's most feared and capable commandos. His reputation was forged in audacity. In September 1943, he had led the glider assault that rescued Benito Mussolini from his mountain prison at Gran Sasso, spiriting the deposed dictator away in a tiny Fieseler Storch that barely cleared the rocky plateau. Just weeks before this meeting, he had orchestrated the kidnapping of Miklas Horthy Jr., forcing Hungary's regent to resign and keeping that nation chained to the Axis cause. Now, Hitler presented him with his most audacious assignment yet. A massive counteroffensive, codenamed Watched and Rain, would be launched through the dense, snow-laden forests of the Ardennes. The goal was not modest, it was to split the American and British armies, drive towards the vital port of Antwerp, and recreate the stunning victory of May 1940 that had brought France to its knees. But this time, Hitler explained, success depended entirely on speed. The panzers had to race through the broken American lines and, most crucially, capture at least one bridge over the Meuse River intact before Allied engineers could destroy them. This was where Skorzeny came in. He would form a special brigade, Panzer Brigade 150, whose sole purpose would be to spearhead this dash and seize those bridges before they could be blown. Then Hitler delivered the detail that made even the hardened commando pause. This could be accomplished more quickly and with fewer losses. The Führer explained if Skorzeny and his men wore American and British uniforms. Small, disguised units could slip through the chaos, causing tremendous confusion, misdirecting troops, spreading panic, and seizing objectives before the enemy realized what was happening. Skorzeny listened, his face a mask. He understood the implications immediately. The Hague Convention of 1907 was unequivocal. Article 23 explicitly forbade the improper use of enemy uniforms and insignia. Soldiers captured while wearing them forfeited their rights as prisoners of war and could be summarily executed as spies. He raised this concern. Hitler, along with General Alfred Jodl and Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, assured him the tactic was legitimate as long as his men removed the Allied uniforms before engaging in actual combat. It was a ruse de guerre, a trick of war, permissible so long as the disguise was shed before the first shot was fired in anger. Within days, Skorzeny submitted his detailed plans to Jodl. He requested 300 men, all with knowledge of English and American dialects. The call went out on October 25th. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht issued an order to every headquarters on the Western Front, requesting English-speaking volunteers for secret commando operations. The order, signed by Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel himself, asked for soldiers with fluency in the English language and knowledge of American idiom. Skorzeny, a practical man, knew this broadcast request was a colossal security breach. It would be intercepted by Allied intelligence within days. He sought permission to cancel the entire operation, but Hitler, living in a world of unwavering will, denied the request. The Allies did indeed intercept the order on November 30th. But Allied intelligence officers, steeped in their own logic, dismissed it as a transparent deception, a clumsy attempt to sow fear. They could not, or would not, believe the Germans would be so brazen. Meanwhile, the volunteers trickled in from all branches of the German military, most having no idea what they had signed up for. Fritz Prinz, a 21-year-old Luftwaffe private trained as an English translator, thought he was headed for a comfortable post interrogating American prisoners, far from the mud and blood of the front. Instead, he found himself isolated behind barbed wire at the training camp established at Greifenwerfer in eastern Bavaria. Security was extreme, paranoid. One man was reportedly shot when a letter home contained too much detail about his location and duties. It was only after arrival that the volunteers discovered their true mission. And the reality of what Skorzeny had to work with would have been comical if the stakes were not so apocalyptic. Of the 500 men eventually assembled, only 10 spoke perfect, idiomatic American English. Another 30 to 40 spoke English well, but had no understanding of slang or regionalisms. Between 120 and 150 spoke English passably. The remainder had only school-level English, barely able to say more than yes and no. Skorzeny later wrote that after a couple of weeks of assessment, the result was terrifying. For those with minimal English, a desperate, almost farcical plan was devised. They were instructed, if challenged by Americans, to exclaim, "Sorry," then open their trousers and hurry off, feigning a sudden, violent bout of diarrhea. It was a measure of the operation's desperation. The equipment situation proved equally dire. OB West was asked to procure 15 Sherman tanks, 20 armoured cars, 20 self-propelled guns, 100 jeeps, 40 motorcycles, and 120 trucks, along with sufficient British and American uniforms. The delivery fell catastrophically short. Only 2 Sherman tanks arrived, both in poor condition, with one breaking down almost immediately. Instead of American armour, Skorzeny received 5 Panther tanks, 6 armoured cars, 6 personnel carriers, and 5 Sturmgeschütze UTZ assault guns, all German. The Panthers were disguised with sheet metal cladding, slapped on olive drab paint, and crude White Star insignia. Skorzeny himself admitted they would fool only very young American troops, seeing them from very far away at night. The uniform situation was worse. Many were British, Polish, or even Russian uniforms, sent by units confused by the request. Some were summer issue, useless in the bitter December cold. Others bore bloodstains or the tail, PW, markings of captured goods. Skorzeny managed to acquire enough authentic American uniforms and weapons for only the small, elite commando teams. The best English speakers were formed into a special unit designated Einheitsstilo, named after SS Captain Stilo, who would lead them. These teams received intensive, if rushed, training. They studied the organization of the US Army, learning badges of rank, military customs, and drill procedures. Some were sent to Perdue camps at KU Strin and Lindbergh to practice their English with captured American soldiers, a risky endeavor that yielded invaluable, if chaotic, cultural insights. They watched American movies, westerns, gangster films, comedies, to perfect their accents and learn current slang. They memorized American brand names, sports teams, popular songs, and Hollywood stars. They practiced walking like Americans, slouching with a casual confidence, smoking like Americans, even chewing gum with the specific open mouth bravado of an American soldier. They were learning to perform a role, and the penalty for a bad performance was death. Their missions were divided into 3 categories. Demolition squads of 5 to 6 men would destroy bridges, ammunition dumps, and fuel stores deep behind the lines. Reconnaissance patrols of 3 to 4 men would scout both sides of the Meuse River, passing on false orders to American units they encountered, reversing road signs, removing minefield warnings, and cordoning off roads with warnings of non-existent mines. The lead commando units, the tip of the spear, would work directly with the attacking German panzer divisions, cutting telephone wires, destroying command posts, and issuing false orders to create paralysis. The commandos knew the risks from their own side as well. In the chaos of battle, they might be shot by German troops who mistook them for actual Americans. Elaborate identification signals were devised. Vehicles would display a small yellow triangle on the rear. Tanks would maintain their guns at specific pre-arranged positions. Soldiers would wear pink or blue scarves beneath their uniforms to be revealed at the critical moment. On December 14th, Panzer Brigade 150 assembled near Bad Meun and Sterifel. On the afternoon of December 16th, they moved out, advancing behind the 3 massive attacking panzer divisions. The plan was elegant in its simplicity once the spearhead divisions, particularly the 1st SS Panzer, division led by the ruthless Jochen Paper, broke through the American crust. Skorzeny's disguised forces would move around them and race ahead to capture the Meuse bridges. The entire operation was a parasite, its lifeblood the success of Paper's panzers. December 16, 1944, began before dawn. Through the dark, frozen forests of the Ardennes, more than 200 Zarazm German troops launched Hitler's last great offensive in the West. The initial assault achieved a stunning, brutal surprise. American forces, thinly spread across an 80-mile front considered a ghost front, for recuperating units, faced an overwhelming tide. 4 inexperienced or battle-weary American divisions confronted 30 German divisions supported by nearly 1,000 tanks. The German artillery barrage shattered the frozen morning. Searchlights bounced off the low clouds to create artificial moonlight, illuminating the ghostly, advancing infantry and the dark shapes of panzers rumbling forward on the narrow, icy roads. For the first few hours, everything proceeded according to plan. The Bars-Einheit-Stilo teams infiltrated in the confusion. Dressed in American uniforms and driving captured jeeps, they slipped through the chaotic American withdrawal. One team drove directly into an American, held town, calmly scouted all its defenses, and then, on their way out, redirected an American convoy of armor and supplies down a road leading away from the front. 2 other teams successfully misdirected Allied convoys, adding to the general fog of war. They cut telephone wires, removed road signs, and spread false rumors of German breakthroughs far deeper than the actual penetrations. But on December 17th, reality, in the form of stubborn American resistance, shattered the operation's prospects. The 1st SS Panzer Division, Paper's spearhead, failed to reach its objectives on schedule. Fierce American resistance at Elsenborn Ridge denied the Germans the northern roads they needed. At St. Vith, American defenders fought with a ferocity that delayed the German timetable by nearly a week. The rapid, clean breakthrough that Operation Greif, Griffin, required never materialized. The Meuse might as well have been 1,000 miles away. Skorzeny realized the same day that his mission's original aims were doomed. He attended a staff conference at the 6th Panzer Army headquarters and suggested his brigade be used as a conventional unit. The request was approved. Panzer Brigade 150 was ordered to assemble south of Malmedy and report to the 1st SS Panzer Division. But the commando teams were already loose behind American lines, wolves separated from the pack. Some completed their missions of minor sabotage. Others were captured almost immediately. They were caught when they failed password challenges. When nervous American soldiers noticed the subtle wrongness of their British weapons or the distinct shape of their German boots. When their English failed under the pressure of a sharp question. When they could not answer simple questions about the America they were supposed to be from. The capture near Iwale on December 17th of Pernas, Billing, and Schmidt, the one that began with Sergeant Creel's vigilance, created the specific panic that would define the operation's real, lasting impact. During interrogation, Schmidt, perhaps to seem more important, perhaps believing a wild rumor, made a statement that electrified Allied intelligence. He claimed their mission was part of a larger operation to infiltrate Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, CGIF, in Paris and capture or kill General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself. Whether Schmidt believed this rumor or was spreading deliberate disinformation remains one of the unresolved mysteries of the operation. No credible evidence has ever confirmed such a plan existed. The actual mission was to capture bridges, but the statement had immediate and dramatic consequences. Within hours, security around Eisenhower was transformed into an iron cage. The Supreme Commander found himself virtually imprisoned in his headquarters at Versailles, surrounded by a phalanx of MPs who checked and checked the identity of everyone entering the building, even senior officers he knew by sight. Eisenhower was reportedly furious at the confinement, a caged lion. After several days, he angrily declared, "I have to get out of this place! I don't care if anyone tries to kill me." But the fear held him fast. The paranoia, however, spread far beyond protecting one man. Allied forces, already reeling from the shocking German offensive, now saw potential infiltrators in every shadow, in every unfamiliar face. Checkpoints sprouted like poisonous mushrooms throughout the Allied rear areas, creating a logistical nightmare that greatly slowed the movement of troops and supplies to the critical front. American military policemen, empowered and terrified, began interrogating every soldier passing through, using questions designed to identify Germans posing as Americans. It was a pop culture inquisition. What is the capital of Illinois? Who won the World Series in 1940? Who is Mickey Mouse's girlfriend? What team plays at Wrigley Field? Who is married to Betty Grable? Where does the guard stand in a football formation? Who is Frank Sinatra? What is the name of the president's dog? The questions ranged from state geography to baseball statistics to Hollywood gossip to American slang. MPs improvised constantly, creating new questions based on whatever piece of American trivia they could pluck from their own memories. The system was chaotic, absurd, and often infuriatingly effective. Many genuine American soldiers could not answer the questions. Regional differences meant a soldier from rural Georgia had no knowledge of the starting lineup for the Chicago Cubs. Educational differences meant some Americans had never formally learned state capitals or followed the minutiae of professional sports. The checkpoints created a cascade of problems, some dangerous, some darkly humorous. General Omar Bradley, the calm and respected commander of the 12th Army Group, was detained when he correctly identified Springfield as the capital of Illinois. The young MP, hailing from Chicago and convinced his hometown was the capital, held the general until his identity could be verified by a flustered superior officer. Brigadier General Bruce Clark was held at gunpoint after he incorrectly stated the Chicago Cubs played in the American League. A captain spent a week in a grim detention cell after an overzealous MP noticed he was wearing a pair of fine leather boots he had taken as a souvenir from a dead German officer. British and Canadian soldiers faced particular difficulties. When reconnaissance officer David Niven, the movie star turned soldier, encountered a guard demanding to know who won the 1940 World Series, he could only reply, with impeccable English charm, that he hadn't the faintest idea. British troops, who could not answer questions about American sports or geography, were frequently detained for hours until their identities could be verified through other, more bureaucratic means. Some American soldiers, frustrated by the absurdity of it all, gave deliberately wrong answers as a form of protest, resulting in their own detention. Others, officers especially, became incensed at being questioned by junior enlisted men, creating tense confrontations that further slowed the vital flow of men and material. The paranoia affected military operations significantly. Troop movements that should have taken hours required days as every vehicle was stopped and every occupant subjected to a cultural litmus test. Supply convoys sat idle at checkpoints while drivers fumbled to prove their American identity. Units rushing to reinforce threatened sectors like Bastogne were delayed by repeated, nerve-shredding interrogations. Commanders found their orders questioned by subordinates who now suspected everyone, from a lowly private to a general, might be a German infiltrator. For the German infiltrators still behind American lines, the psychological impact was severe. They found themselves trapped in a narrowing world, unable to move freely. The cultural questions exposed the fundamental inadequacy of their preparations. They had studied military procedures, learned rank insignia, memorized American Army organization, but they had not anticipated being interrogated about the 1940 World Series. See the Cincinnati Reds. Betty Grable's husband Alzen bandleader Harry James, or the capital of Illinois. Their classroom knowledge was useless against the lived, absorbed culture of their enemies. Some infiltrators attempted to avoid checkpoints entirely, traveling cross-country through frozen forests and fields. This made them more conspicuous to American patrols hunting for stragglers and deserters. Others tried to bluff their way through, offering excuses for why they couldn't answer questions. Head injuries, shell shock, amnesia. Few succeeded. Between December 16th and December 31st, American forces captured 23 members of Operation Greif. 16 were captured in the chaotic first 2 weeks. The team leader, Gerd von Stilo, was captured later and tried in May 1945. Each captured infiltrator faced a military trial. The legal situation was starkly clear under international law. Article 23 of the Hague Convention forbade the improper use of enemy uniforms. Soldiers captured wearing them while conducting hostile acts could be tried as spies, not soldiers. The first trial began at Henry Chapelle on December 21st. Pernas, Billing, and Schmidt faced a military commission, charged with violating the laws of war by wearing American uniforms while conducting military operations. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. They had been captured in American uniforms, carrying American weapons and identification, but wearing German field grey underneath. The trial was swift, a matter of hours. All three were convicted and sentenced to death by firing squad. On December 23, 1944, 2 days before Christmas, the sentences were carried out. American military police led the three Germans to a barren, frozen patch of earth behind the prison. Captain J. Iser of the 633rd Medical Clearing Station solemnly pinned small white paper targets over their hearts. Schmidt's glasses were removed. The prisoners were offered blindfolds. They accepted. The military police formed the firing squad. As the orders were read, Billing, his voice cracking with a final, defiant fervour, shouted, "Long live our Führer, Adolf Hitler." The command was given. The volley of rifle fire was sharp, precise, and final. All three men crumpled to the ground, dead instantly. Their bodies were cut down, carried away, and buried in unmarked graves. Eventually, they would be interred at the German military cemetery at Lommel, Belgium, where they rest today alongside more than 39,000 other German war dead. The cemetery makes no distinction between those executed as spies and those killed in battle. 13 additional Operation Greif participants were tried and executed at either Henry Chapelle or High between December 21st and December 31st. Wilhelm von Arnfeld, Manfred Brunny, Hans Reich, Arno Krauner, Jutta Schutze, Herbert Gerig, Horst Gick, Norbert Pollack, Rolf Benjamin Werner, Hans Witzel, Otto August Frank, and Anton Mauer all faced the same military tribunal, the same swift conviction, and the same firing squad. Each execution was carried out with cold, military precision, without malice, but without mercy. Team leader Gerd von Stilo was tried by a military commission in May 1945, after Germany's surrender, and executed near Braunschweig on June 14th. Why his trial was delayed remains unclear, lost in the administrative chaos of the war's end. The United States Ninth Army carried out the sentence. In total, 17 Operation Greif participants were executed for wearing enemy uniforms. Their operation's tactical accomplishments were negligible. No bridges were captured. No major demolitions succeeded. No critical communications were permanently disrupted. A few road signs were reversed. Some telephone lines were cut. Several American units received false orders, though most were quickly countermanded. But the psychological impact vastly exceeded any tangible results. For weeks, American forces operated under a cloud of suspicion. A low-grade fever of paranoia that affected decision-making at every level. Eisenhower's confinement meant the Supreme Commander was isolated from direct observation of the battlefield during the offensive's most critical phase. The checkpoint delays, absurd as they were, demonstrably slowed the American response. Units that should have reached threatened sectors in hours took days to arrive. Their progress hobbled by the constant need to prove they were who they appeared to be. The widespread suspicion degraded unit cohesion. Soldiers who should have been focused on fighting the Germans to their front now glanced nervously at the men beside them, wondering if they were friends or foes. The Battle of the Bulge itself ground on, its colossal scale rendering Operation Greif a mere sideshow. German forces drove deep into American lines, creating the Bulge that gave the battle its name. At Bastogne, the surrounded 101st Airborne and elements of the 10th Armoured Division held out against relentless attacks. On December 22nd, when German officers delivered a surrender ultimatum, the acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, responded with a single typed word that became legend: nuts. When the confused German officers asked what it meant, they were told it was the equivalent of "go to hell." The 101st held Bastogne until relieved by Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army, which executed a remarkable 90-degree turn and drove north through brutal weather and terrain to break the siege on December 26th. By early January, Allied counterattacks from the north and south had squeezed the Bulge, and by January 25th, the front lines were largely restored to their pre-offensive positions. The battle, lasting from December 16, 1944, to January 25, 1945, involved more than 1 million men, making it the largest battle ever fought by the United States Army. American casualties exceeded 80,000, including 19,000 killed and 23,000 captured or missing. German casualties were similar, but Germany, bled white by years of total war, could not replace those losses. The battle marked the definitive end of Germany's ability to conduct major offensive operations in the West. Hitler had gambled everything in the Ardennes and lost. For Otto Skorzeny, Operation Greif was effectively over by December 17th, when his brigade was converted to conventional operations. On December 21st, the brigade attempted to capture the vital crossroads at Montmedy, but was repulsed with heavy losses after several assaults. Skorzeny himself was wounded by artillery shrapnel near Ligneuville. He recovered and continued serving until Germany's surrender in May 1945. When he surrendered to the 30th Infantry Regiment, he spent 2 years in custody, awaiting his own day in court. At the Dachau trials in 1947, Skorzeny and 9 officers of Panzer Brigade 150 faced charges of improperly using American uniforms, entering combat while disguised, and treacherously firing upon American forces. They were also charged with the lesser offense of wrongfully obtaining American uniforms and Red Cross parcels from POW camps. Skorzeny's defense was clever and rested on a crucial legal distinction. He argued, and produced orders to support it, that his men had been instructed to remove their American uniforms before engaging in actual combat. The disguises, he contended, were solely for infiltration and deception, a legitimate ruse de guerre, not for fighting. A surprise defense witness proved decisive. FEO Thomas, a former British Special Operations executive, Soviet agent known as the White Rabbit, testified with compelling authority that Allied forces had used identical tactics. He stated he had personally worn German uniforms behind enemy lines during missions in France to move more freely. Other witnesses testified to similar Allied practices. The American military tribunal was persuaded. It drew a clear line between using enemy uniforms during combat and using them for deception and infiltration. It could not be proven that Skorzeny had ordered his men to fight while wearing American uniforms. The tribunal acquitted all defendants. The verdict was controversial then and remains so today. 17 of Skorzeny's men had been executed for the same actions for which he was acquitted. The difference lay in timing evidence and the evolving interpretation of the law under the cold light of peacetime. The men executed in December 1944 had been captured in the act. Their American uniforms a central part of their captured identity during a moment of supreme national crisis. Skorzeny, tried in 1947, could demonstrate through documentation that his orders explicitly prohibited combat while disguised. The trial established an important precedent in the laws of war. Using enemy uniforms for deception was a legitimate trick, provided combatants removed the disguises before engaging in combat. Skorzeny did not remain in custody long after his acquittal. In 1948, he escaped from an internment camp in Darmstadt in a dramatic fashion that seemed ripped from one of his own operations. Former SS officers, disguised as American military police, allegedly facilitated his escape. Some historians have speculated that American intelligence, impressed by his expertise and potentially seeing a use for him in the nascent Cold War, may have tacitly allowed or even assisted the escape, though no concrete evidence has ever confirmed this. Skorzeny spent time hiding on a Bavarian farm, then in Salzburg and Paris, eventually settling in Franco Spain, a haven for former Nazis. He worked as a military advisor to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser and was allegedly involved with the shadowy ODSA network that helped former SS men escape to South America. Otto Skorzeny died of cancer on July 5, 1975, in Madrid at the age of 67. He never expressed public regret for Operation Greif or any of his other wartime actions. The legacy of the checkpoint interrogations became woven into American military folklore. The questions about baseball and Hollywood, state capitals and movie stars became enduring symbols of how a shared, often trivial, cultural identity could be weaponized as a security tool during a moment of supreme crisis. The improvised system, for all its chaos and absurdity, proved devastatingly effective at exposing infiltrators whose intensive language and cultural training could not replicate the casual, absorbed, cultural knowledge that Americans carried from childhood. Being American, it turned out, involved more than just speaking English or wearing the right uniform. It involved a million tiny, unspoken things. A shared memory of Saturday matinees, the heartbreak of a favorite team losing the pennant, the boring rote memorization of state capitals in a dusty classroom, the lyrics to a popular song whistled on the radio. This cultural cohesion, so often taken for granted, proved to be a national security asset when tested by enemy infiltrators. The Germans could study the facts, but they couldn't live the experience. The 17 men executed for Operation Greif are remembered today primarily through the silent rows of headstones at Lommel. Their graves are maintained with the same somber care as those of soldiers who fell in conventional combat. Manfred Pernus was 23 years old at his execution. Juadrentha Billing, 21, remained a convinced Nazi to his final, shouted moment. Wilhelm Schmidt, 24, faced his death with a quiet resignation. Each was someone's son, perhaps someone's brother or friend. Each had made a series of choices that led them to that frozen patch of Belgian ground, to those posts, to those blindfolds, to the crack of those rifles. Operation Greif's ultimate legacy extended far beyond its tactical failure. It demonstrated with brutal clarity that special operations, no matter how clever or audacious, cannot compensate for the failure of conventional military forces. Skorzeny's infiltrators could not capture bridges if Paper's panzers never reached the start line. No amount of deception and confusion could substitute for the armoured breakthrough that never occurred. Yet, in a bitter irony, the operation succeeded in creating disruption far exceeding what the actual infiltrators accomplished. The mere possibility of infiltration, the spectre Skorzeny had unleashed, created a panic that affected the decision-making of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and the entire Allied High Command. This gap between perception and reality, between the actual threat and the feared threat became a key lesson in modern strategic thinking about psychological warfare and the disproportionate effects of special operations. The Battle of the Bulge ended in late January 1945. Allied forces, bloodied but victorious, resumed their relentless advance into the heart of Germany. Within 4 months, the Third Reich lay in ruins. Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945. The 17 executed Operation Greif participants were already in their graves. Their war ended violently on Belgian soil, far from home. Their operation had failed in every tangible objective. But it had succeeded in sowing a unique brand of fear and confusion that hampered Allied operations during the battle's most critical, vulnerable opening days. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, speaking to Parliament on January 18, 1945, while the battle still raged, declared it undoubtedly the greatest American battle of the war and will, I believe, be regarded as an ever famous American victory. He explicitly noted that Americans had engaged 30 to 40 men for every one of our soldiers, emphasizing that this was fundamentally an American trial and an American triumph. The checkpoint guards who asked about baseball and Betty Grable did not know they were creating folklore. They were solving an immediate, terrifying problem, improvising security measures to identify an enemy who looked exactly like them. Their solution worked because it was rooted in something genuine and shared. Americans knew these things not because they were important, but because they were American. The Germans, trying to impersonate them, could study the facts, but could not replicate a lifetime of cultural absorption. This fundamental distinction between learned facts and lived culture proved decisive. The German failure demonstrated a principle that remains chillingly relevant in the modern age. Deep cover agents and sophisticated disinformation campaigns. Cultural knowledge, absorbed through lived experience over years, cannot be quickly or convincingly taught to adults from a fundamentally different background. Modern intelligence services now spend years, not weeks, preparing their deep cover agents, precisely because they understand that true cultural fluency is a slow marinade, not a quick dip. Operation Greif stands as a compelling case study in the limits of audacity. It exemplifies how ambitious planning, disconnected from a realistic assessment of capabilities and resources, leads to inevitable failure. Hitler's late war decision-making was riddled with this pattern, grandiose in conception, inadequate in execution, and utterly divorced from operational reality. Yet, the operation's unintended success in creating panic also validated the concept that psychological warfare and deception can be potent force multipliers, capable of inflicting damage far out of proportion to the resources committed. The 17 men who died before firing squads for wearing the wrong uniform would be largely forgotten footnotes, if not for the historical record that preserves their names and their story. They were not important men. They accomplished little before their capture. Their grand operation failed comprehensively. Yet their executions marked a significant moment in military and legal history, clarifying the harsh but necessary application of international law regarding perfidy in warfare. Their legacy lives on in the lessons their failed mission taught. Identity verification remains a cornerstone of security. Cultural knowledge remains a difficult, often impossible, thing for outsiders to fake convincingly. Special operations remain a valuable tool, but they are a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. They cannot substitute for conventional military success. The laws of war remain a crucial, if often grim, framework for conflict, subject to interpretation based on circumstances and evidence. And the human cost of war extends beyond those killed in the heat of combat, to include those executed after capture, their lives ended by the cold, deliberate process of military justice. Each execution was a human being, with a family and a history, and a future potential. Extinguished by bullets fired on legal authority after a proper trial. The graves at Lommel mark lives cut short, not just by war, but by war's brutal, unyielding logic. The checkpoint guards who asked about baseball were American soldiers who followed orders, and many of them, too, carried the psychological burden of having to execute prisoners, even enemies convicted of espionage, a weight that would linger long after the snow melted from the Ardennes. Operation Greif failed to capture a single bridge. It caused no major destruction. It killed relatively few Americans directly. But the fear it created, the paranoia it injected into the Allied bloodstream, delayed reinforcements, disrupted command decisions, and consumed immense resources during the most critical days of Hitler's last gamble. The indirect impact, impossible to quantify with precision, shaped the battle's opening phase in ways both subtle and profound. The infiltrators caught, tried, and executed within days demonstrated American military justice operating at a brutal, wartime tempo. The speed from capture to execution reflected the extreme pressure of combat conditions and established a stark precedent. Though modern standards of justice would undoubtedly require more deliberate and lengthy proceedings, the story of Operation Greif and the Battle of the Bulge reminds us that warfare is a multifaceted beast. It encompasses more than just troop movements and artillery barrages. Psychological impact, cultural factors, and raw perception often matter as much as, or even more than, tactical results. A failed operation that creates widespread panic may achieve more strategic disruption than a successful operation that goes completely unnoticed. The checkpoint interrogations, for all their seeming absurdity, worked precisely because they tested a deep well of knowledge that genuine Americans possessed naturally, while the infiltrators, despite their training, could only mimic the surface. The American soldiers who fought and froze and died in the Battle of the Bulge faced not only a powerful and desperate enemy offensive, but also the unique psychological burden of suspecting that the enemy might be anywhere, wearing any uniform, speaking any language. This erosion of certainty, this poisoning of trust, marked a new and terrifying dimension in warfare, one that would influence military security procedures and the very psyche of the soldier for generations to come. The shadow of the Griffin, though chimerical, was long and cold.